Thank you for joining us for another episode of Digitally Diverse, where we do a deep dive into the careers of some of Australia's best designers. Today we have the privilege of having Kathryn Sadler join us, who is a senior conversation designer. Thank you so much for joining us, Kathryn.
You're welcome.
I love to start off our episodes by just getting a really broad overview of, where you've come from, your career to date, just a bit of an overview for listeners who may not know who you are.
No problem. So, I'm a senior conversation designer. I've been working in conversational AI on and off for 15 to 20 years. So I started out, I did languages and linguistics at uni, worked for a business consultancy in the UK doing project coordination, and they had projects in Russia, and I'd studied Russian at uni, so I was able to use my Russian a little bit. Came to Australia as a backpacker, didn't really know what I was doing, and just by chance got a role with a company called Appen, who were, at the time, they were tiny. They were like 15, 20 people, and now they're one of the main Australian tech stocks. They're a company that collects AI training data. And from there, stayed in tech, worked as a VUI designer, what's a voice user interface designer, on IVR systems, so the phone systems when you call Telstra or Vodafone or banks. And then I took a bit of a break, had a bit of a career change, went into UX design for a few years. And then I actually came back round into conversation design, as it's now known, working with Nova FM radio network. They had a couple of smart speaker apps, so they wanted somebody with some UX design experience and some voice experience. So that's how I kind of came back round, and then I've had a couple of roles since then. So it's as if I've followed a deliberate path now, because it's all kind of come full circle, but I've very much haven't. I've just kind of gone, oh, that looks interesting. I'll do that.
I think, a lot of people who work in tech just find themselves suddenly in something that probably didn't exist when they were at uni. So that sounds like that's your story. I guess, what are you up to at the moment? Are you just freelancing, or what are you working on?
So I'm looking for a new role at the moment. My last role was a contract with Salesforce at the end of last year, beginning of this year. Before that, I was with a 10-person startup. So it was a bit of a jump from 10 people to 80,000 or however many they had before they started all of their layoffs this year. So at the moment, I'm looking for a new role in conversational AI or generative AI or prompt engineering or conversation design. There's a few sort of interesting opportunities out there. So I'm just sort of choosing carefully where I'd like to be.
Definitely. And I know for me anyway, I recruit in the UX space and the design space. And even in Australia, we've got a pretty robust design industry, but the conversation design is a pretty niche part of that industry. Can you tell us a little bit about what that entails day to day for people who are unaware?
So it's incredibly niche, which I find interesting. Even globally, it's quite niche. Like, a lot of people are seeing conversation design as the big new shiny thing, a bit like UX design was 10 years ago, and going, oh, I want to do that. But there's roles, but there's not that many roles out there.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's a combination of language. It's good if you're good with languages, whether you've come from a languages or linguistics background like I have, or copywriting or content design. You're also using that experience design, so my UX design background, but also you need to be I feel like you need to be more comfortable with tech hands-on than general UX UI design roles, because you can be doing a bit of everything depending on the company you're at. So at Salesforce, it was almost more conversation design advocacy and looking at best practices and sort of assisting various areas of Salesforce that had their own chatbots, because it was quite fragmented.
Mm-hmm.
My previous company, TalkVia, was a startup, so many hats.
Just jumped in everywhere.
I was head of conversation design. I was probably the only person that was end to end across all of our projects. So I was project management. I was overseeing the QA, coordinating the tech resources, doing all of the conversation design, which involves looking at the logic for whatever you're working on, whether it's a smart speaker, an Alexa application, or whether it's an IVR or a chatbot. So you've got to sort of work out the logic, map out the flows, think about the copy. You've got to be quite careful about how you phrase things, so that people, especially with voice, so that people come back with a response the way you're expecting them to. Well, actually, saying that, this was in the days before generative AI, where it's all a lot smarter now. We don't have to be quite so precise about how we do things, but
Mhm.
lots of hats, bit of research. Yeah,
Yeah, a bit of everything.
it's interesting.
To me, looking from the outside, it seems like a lot of the projects that you've been working on have been pretty, like, cutting edge, the first of their kind, like, pretty greenfield projects.
Yeah,
What's that been like, just constantly been working on things that haven't really been done before?
it's scary, but it's fun. When I came back into conversation design, it was really like at Nova. It was more we were like a little R&D team in a radio station, which is kind of unusual. Working on their smart speaker apps and looking at ways that we could, because advertising is such a big thing at radio networks, we were looking at ways that we could sort of incorporate. We did like a fun interactive advert on Google Smart Speakers so that people could enter a red room competition for Nova
Cool.
via their smart speaker. So that was kind of fun. It was more sort of playing with what could we do that's new. And at Talk Via, I was working on projects for the Lot, Make a Wish Australia, Southern Cross Austereo as well, which was sort of Triple M cricket. And that was again more sort of companies were just sort of trying to think of new ways to interact with their audience and sort of be seen as sort of leaders in the field, sort of trying something new.
Yeah. Not only do you have to have, like, the technical know-how, but it sounds like there's a lot of creativity and a lot of, like, just thinking on your feet and pushing the boundaries for a lot of the projects that you're working on.
Yeah, it can be quite interesting, but more so, I do think, yeah, that you sort of you take what the customer's sort of thinking of, and you've got to sort of go along with, okay, well, we can't actually do this. You need to guide them. I mean, like with anything, you've got to guide them as to. There's a lot more constraints certainly with voice tech, but also with
Mhm.
bots in general. So that's something that customers might not have thought about.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's sort of a lot of guiding, yeah, the creativity side of it, but also just understanding the logic and how it's going to work so that you can work with the developers really closely and
Mhm.
make sure that you're not designing something that they then, you can't just design something and then punt it to them and they go, well, hang on a minute.
Yeah. How does this happen?
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned before that you've got a linguistics background. Can you tell us a little bit more about, like, your tertiary education and what that entailed?
yeah, I like I say, it seems like I followed a deliberate path, but I had no idea. Like at school, I was like at A level in the UK, you do sort of 3, 4, 5 subjects. Back when I did it was 3 rather than HSC, which is quite broad. So I did maths and languages because I really didn't know which direction I wanted to go. I ended up doing modern language studies at university, which was specifically French, German, and Russian. And then within that, I had linguistics modules, but they were specific to the language. So I did a lot of phonetics, but that was relevant to German. I did some French sociolinguistics,
Mhm.
which was it was really interesting. But you have to be a certain personality, I think, to study languages. You've got to be quite confident to get out there and just not worry about getting things wrong and just to become fluent. And 21, 22, I wasn't that person. So I probably should have. I looked at maths and linguistics courses actually at uni, and looking back now, because right now it would be super useful with generative AI and large language models. So now I'm kind of like, oh,
Dang
wish I
it.
had wish I had backed myself and followed that, but I was a bit too scared of doing a maths degree. It seemed a bit too sort of intimidating.
And I guess, like, a traditional maths course or a bachelor degree, back in those days, I mean, forgive me if I'm wrong, but it kind of would be a little bit limiting. Like, if you wanted to work in tech, you would, go more into the computer science or the IT route, where just pure maths would be like, "Oh, okay, I'm just limited to maths." Where at least with languages,
Yeah,
you can apply it to different things, and yeah, so I think if I was in your shoes, I would have picked the same thing, to be honest.
yeah, look, it was sort of, and I shouldn't, like, I don't have regrets because the languages got me my first role, which was working with Russian, and my experience in that job got me my role with Appen, which was my first role in conversational AI, and it's all led to the next opportunity.
Exactly.
And yeah, like I say, now maths and linguistics would be super relevant, but I'm not quite sure what I would have done for the last 20 years.
Exactly. Yeah.
Sort of waiting for that sort of moment to come.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
guess
definitely.
it would have been quite specific, but
Well, I guess, was there a particular, like, catalyst when you were at Appen that you were like, oh, holy moly, like light bulb moment. This is what I want to be getting into. Like, was there a eureka moment for you getting into tech?
Um, Look, it was accidental that the role at Appen was purely accidental. I just saw the ad, and I was talking to another company at the time, and Appen were working with all these languages, and they were asking me about my phonetics sort of studies, and I was like, wow, this is really obscure and quite interesting. And in all honesty, when I first started there, I had no idea what they did. I was just sort of trying to learn as I went, and it was quite technical. We used to work on dual boot Windows machines, so sometimes we would have to just reboot into Linux and do stuff in Linux, and all of this was completely new to me because I had done nothing on
Mhm.
computers up until that point. But I loved it. Like, it was a steep learning curve, but it was I just yeah, just being able to sort of do all this really interesting tech work. Sort of the department I managed, I was managing projects which was their phonetic dictionary. So we would what Appen would do is they would go out to a country like Korea, do a data collection, sort of collect participants that met certain demographics, record them reading scripts that were what they called phonetically rich, so they could
Mhm.
collect all the different sounds of the language, bring the audio back to Australia. Native speakers would transcribe that audio, and then my team would take those word lists and put all the phonetics in to tell the computers how. So that's how it all sort of gets put together,
Yeah, wow.
which was just yeah, it was so interesting, and I got to work with actually pretty rarely it was the languages that I actually studied. I worked on Japanese, we worked on Arabic languages, Korean.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was so diverse. It was really really interesting. I really enjoyed the work I did there. I have to say.
Yeah, talk about being chucked into the deep end, like, that is just a baptism of fire.
Yeah, yeah, it was. But
Yeah.
I was young and fresh and keen, so
Well, yeah, I think that's, the common denominator with a lot of people who just, like, land themselves in tech. Is that kind of, like, the advice that you would give to perhaps some students who are wanting to get into the tech realm, or perhaps people who are wanting to, like, get in there from another industry?
yeah, I guess I would say just find out as much as you can. Like on social media, I mean, I mainly use LinkedIn, follow people, read articles, sign up for newsletters, watch webinars, join webinars that if you can, if they're live. Sometimes various conferences that are on, often they look very expensive. Sometimes you can get free tickets somehow. Sometimes you could just hit people up and say, do you have any concession rates?
Yeah.
Like I've done at the moment when I've been out of work. Yeah, so just find out as much as you can. TAFE actually has a new, I think it's relatively new, the Institute of Applied Technology. They have a lot of online courses at the moment in AI, and they're actually really interesting. They're sort of short 3 or 4 hour courses.
Mhm.
And I think they give you a really good overview. So if it's something that you're considering investing in sort of more time or money in, sort of actually paying for a formal course, I think it's good to get a little taster first and really decide whether that's sort of what you want to do. I blindly just sort of went from one thing to the next. I didn't really take the time to do that, I guess. So I'm giving advice that I should probably have followed. But it was also different back when I was getting into tech.
Well, that's great, like, advice coming from hindsight is usually yeah, usually pretty spot on, so and yeah, I agree, like, some people, you invest sometimes years in going to university or doing a course and investing all this money and time, and then you get
Mm.
to so many friends actually have gotten to the end of their degree and be like, "Oh, I actually don't think I wanna do this." So, especially when you're so young as well, it's really, really easy to get all swept up in, like, "Oh, I need to go to university, I need to do this."
Mm. Oh,
And, and you just don't know what you're actually gonna like and what the industry is gonna be like when you graduate and when you actually get out there.
yeah, absolutely. It's hard because sort of 18 to 20, you're trying to work out what you want to do. You're following the advice of teachers and parents, possibly mainly, which I did. And I kind of wish I hadn't. I kind of wish I'd backed myself more. And yeah, you can very much feel pushed down a certain direction.
Mhm.
Whereas there's so, like, you've got to try and step back and be objective. It's really hard to do. But I mean, I always say I'm still trying to work out what I want to do when I grow up. I'm still sort of just going, oh, well, this is interesting for now, but what's next? I do admire people that are like, as a teenager are like, I want to do marine biology, and they just follow that and stick with it. I do admire that, but I also admire people that finish a degree and go, yeah, no, that's not for me.
Mhm.
I think I want to be a plumber instead or something.
The world's always gonna need plumbers. No, I totally get that. There's nothing wrong in realizing that as well. I feel like there's lots of people who are like, "Oh, well, I have invested all this time into university or this course or doing all of this training. Well, I've got to do it now." And like, no, you actually don't. Like you can pivot and you can use those learnings in another sense,
Yep.
and they might come in handy 10, 15, 20 years later.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I totally get that. It sounds to me like you really like a challenge when it comes to your next gig. You're always wanting to find something interesting. Is that kind of like what lights you up and like inspires you to do the work you do?
Yeah, I guess, like I say, it is scary. And I used to think I hated change, but actually, I've seen a lot of change in the last 10 years, the different roles I've done.
Mhm.
I think mainly it's exciting working on stuff that's pretty cutting edge
Yeah.
and working in tech generally. Like everyone else, it feels, is really smart. I'm always like, everyone else just seems much smarter than you. So it's like, much as it can be intimidating, yeah, it's amazing some of the people you get to work with.
Mhm.
So I think it's the people I work with that probably I find the most inspiring rather than almost more than the work I'm actually doing.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think, like, with the fact that you're in the AI space, what's your opinion of how that's changed over the last, like, 10 years or so? Has there been, like, some really big takeaways?
It's not even so much in the 10 years, it's the last 6 months. Like, nothing
Yeah.
was really well, the last 6 months generally for the public with ChatGPT launching at the end of last year. I mean, we sort of knew all these things were happening, but even conversation design as a role, and because I'm not currently working in that role, I don't have the ability to see the hands-on changes, but I can see from hearing about my old team at Salesforce and how they've had to completely pivot from how they approached conversation design before, whereas now they're pretty much doing prompt design.
Mhm.
So yeah, just in the last 6, maybe 12 months or more, it's hugely changing. I mean, my first speech sort of voice tech project was a long time ago for Optus. It was one of their IVRs, and I had to do all the system testing on that, and it worked. It was flaky. You had to be quite specific what you said, and you had to make sure nobody was coughing in the background, or you weren't out on the street on a mobile. But
Mhm.
it did work. So in some ways, up until recently, I didn't feel like it was that different, other than obviously smart speakers and voice assistants. But yeah, generative AI and large language models now,
Really having a huge impact.
that's huge. I'm sort of still observing what everyone else is doing and learning how it's going to change things.
So it sounds like you've had quite a windy journey so far, Kathryn. So I'm curious if there's any like speed bumps or challenges that you've faced in your career and how that's kind of shaped where you're at.
Yeah, definitely there have been. So, like the first probably 10 to 15 years of my career were pretty smooth. I kind of stuck with one company for a long time. I was with Appen for 3 or 4 years.
Mhm.
And then I went to Dimension Data and I was at DD for, I think, 9 years in the end. It was a long time. And I actually sort of suddenly realized, hang on a minute, I felt like I had no control over the sort of role I was doing. So I found out, I started looking, it was funny actually. So I was a voice user interface designer slash business analyst at DD, but they tended to throw any work at my team that wasn't specifically development work, engineering work. So I could be doing whatever they sold, writing a technical document or system testing or whatever. And I kept seeing these ads for UX designers, and it looked a lot like VUI design. There was a lot of overlap, but I didn't really know what a wireframe was.
Mhm.
So I just by chance I applied for one of these roles and managed to get an interview, and they kind of realized that yeah, no, I wasn't a UI designer, but they actually mentioned to me about General Assembly, a UX design course, and General Assembly were just doing their first immersive user experience design course the following year, sort of like the next month, the beginning of 2014, I think it was.
You're an OG.
So I actually, and this was a big deal for me after being in this company for so long, but I took 3 months unpaid leave, spoke to my managers, took this time off, did this course, trying to pivot. Initially, DD were trying to sort of shift my role, but I ended up getting a role as UX designer with Fairfax, and then spent the next 4 or 5 years in UX design. But sort of through that time, and since I've come back into conversation design, I've actually had my role's been made redundant twice. I just missed a third redundancy last year. So that's sort of thrown a few curveballs. So I've shifted roles a lot more often than I really would like. Like 9 years in one company, that's too long. But
That's a good amount of time.
I've jumped around since I've left. Sort of in the last 10 years, I've jumped around a lot more than I would have liked ideally. But saying that, it's been a great exposure to many different companies and company structures and how they work, and meeting so many different people, different industries, real estate, travel, SaaS companies, UX design and conversation design, and just different team structures and different design teams. So
Mhm.
it's been great. It's a great experience. Like, obviously, always looking back, you kind of realize that it wasn't a bad thing. But yeah, the first time my role was made redundant, that hit me pretty hard because I'd been struggling to find a good role, a good fit,
Mhm.
and then that happened, and it really threw me for a little while. It really sort of smashed my mental health a little bit, to be honest. So
Yeah.
so this time round, looking for work, I'm being quite careful with. I'm always quite open about mental health, and sort of, I don't think it should be like a taboo topic. So,
Mhm.
I think it's something we all need to think about. So
Definitely.
it's been an interesting, turbulent few years, but it's also sort of helps you grow and helps you realize what you're looking for too. Like, it's made me realize what I do and don't want from a role.
Yeah, yeah, I think that a lot of people are also, in that situation at the moment, or over the last 12 months. Like, redundancies and layoffs have been happening. And the more that I speak with people who, you know, as it's happening, it's awful. It's gut-wrenching. You feel the rejection, and you feel like it's such a hit to your confidence, like, oh, like, my skills are redundant, like, what the
Hmm.
heck? But it's interesting to hear from people, a month after, 3 months after, 6 months after, 12 months after. It feels like there's lots of people who are like, "Oh, actually, no, I can press pause and I can actually figure out what I want," rather than like, "Okay, I'm just in my job and I'm doing my thing and life is normal." Like, it forces people to actually look at their situation and where they wanna be, and they all of a sudden have control of the direction again,
Yeah.
which is really nice to it's a nice way of looking at it, that, yeah, it sucks in the moment, but it's a good opportunity to take stock.
Yeah, and I'm lucky I have a lot of support from my husband, so there's no pressure to jump to the next role. Like, I'm careful, which I have done in the past, which has partly contributed to the changing roles, because I jumped to a couple of roles that probably in my gut I knew weren't right,
Mhm.
and definitely weren't, which means you're then looking for it, like, you've just started a role and then you're looking for another role again. So yeah, this time round I'm a lot more cautious, sort of looking what are really the key things, what are the key values for me in a, like, what do I want in a role that I just don't want to sort of give up.
Mhm.
And also, sort of, job hunting generally, yeah, it can be quite demoralizing. But I read somewhere once, I've got it on a post-it on my monitor actually, your value doesn't decrease just because someone fails to see it, or just because they're looking for something else.
Mhm.
Because you can feel the rejection can be quite sort of tough, but you just weren't the right fit or whatever. There's always going to be other opportunities out there.
Definitely, and it's all about timing as well, like, that's
Oh,
got such a huge factor to it.
yeah.
When you were going through, those few redundancies, or even just, like, now job hunting is really tough. Is there anything that you do on the regular to, like, help your productivity or your motivation, like, anything you do for self-care?
The main thing for me is exercise, because then I feel like I have a sense of satisfaction that I've achieved one thing that day. So I try to get it done in the morning. The later I leave it, the harder it is to motivate myself to get out. So I'm pretty lucky. I've got some running buddies that motivate me to get out and run, because I'm not a natural runner. I run because it's kind of good for you and keeps me fit. But getting out on my own for a run, it can be pretty sort of hard to do. So I've got some running buddies I meet sort of early, a couple of times a week. I do a bit of strength training as well, and I'm pretty good with a routine. Sort of, I'm pretty disciplined at sticking to that, and I really find that helps. Getting outside generally, sometimes during the day, I'm like, I've got to get outside for a walk.
Mhm.
And I try, this sounds a bit silly at the moment because I'm not, but I try to meditate regularly. I'm out of the habit at the moment, but I did really well sort of earlier this year. I was being really good with it. And again, it's just sort of that, they say it like takes 6 weeks or something to create a habit. And with the meditation, that's something I've got to get back to. And I think I was expecting sort of massive changes when I first started to meditate, but it's more just it gradually just quietens things down a bit in your head, and it's easier to step back and step away from the noise.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think when I first started years ago, dabbling and trying to work out what this meditation was and how you do it, there's a lot of expectation on yourself, but
Mhm.
if you're sitting and you're still your mind's going crazy, well, that's just the way it is some days.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes there is no off switch, but yeah, you're right, like, it definitely helps, turn down the volume.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so Headspace is the app that I use, and I almost feel like that guy. I forget his name, Andy Puddicombe, the British Headspace guy, the founder of it. Like when I hear his voice, I'm so used to it now. His voice just calms me down. It feels like an old friend. It sounds a bit cheesy, but
The Pavlov effect or whatever it's called. It's just like the association.
yeah, absolutely.
Is there anything else that takes up your spare time on your off hours?
Apart from like, yeah, exercise, I mean, I've got my sort of routine of my sort of general early morning runs. On the weekends, sometimes I used to do a lot more trail running, so I used to like to get out for longer trail runs, and that's always nice, just getting out in the bush. And I normally do a lot of ocean swimming. I'm also out of the habit of that at the moment, but I go down to Manly on the northern beaches, and we've got a swim down there, sort of across a marine reserve. But yeah, another thing I've got to get back into. But apart from that, I've got 2 cats, so hanging out at home with my cats,
Mhm.
drinking craft beers. I'm big into the craft beer scene. Dragging my husband off to various breweries.
Well, I'm sure he enjoys that.
There's worse places, right? It's not like I'm dragging him off to some, I don't know,
Exactly.
wedding stores or something. Like, yeah, I think last time I was in Newcastle, it was for a beer festival.
Oh, fantastic. I know we do have a pretty good craft beer scene up here. I'm hoping that more is gonna, that it will rival our winery scene in the Hunter Valley. I don't know if that's, a little bit too optimistic, but,
No,
a girl can dream.
it's growing. It's growing all the time. Like it's huge. It's huge in Sydney now compared to, yeah, 5, 10 years ago.
Mhm. Even up I was in Brisbane recently, and up there, it's so good. Like, they just know how to streamline it and just, like, simple, good beer. No I feel like sometimes it's very easy for, breweries to be a little bit pretentious, but there's, just, like, classic, solid, really good
Yeah,
stuff that they're putting out up there. So shout out to Brisbane.
there are some great breweries up in Brisbane. Yes, I've got a mate up there. I've got to visit soon. So yeah, there are some great spots.
Is there any, like, podcasts that you like to listen to or any kinda, like, content, like books or, YouTube creators, anyone like that that you like to listen to?
I podcast wise, I did get into listening to podcasts a lot more when I used to commute, especially when I was commuting to Nova because I was sort of on the bus and the ferry. To be honest, since I've been working remotely, I don't tend to do the podcast so much. Partly because if I get out for a walk, I'm trying to switch off. But VUX World, which is voice user experience, and the VoiceBot podcast, and there's another one I think called Inside Voice. They were some of the ones, but now I tend to just see what's popping up on LinkedIn, and I often have a list of, oh, I need to watch that at some point, and different webinars. Or I find it better to jump onto a webinar live, like when it's happening,
Mhm.
because if I think, oh, I'll watch the recording later, you just never get round to finding that hour. Whereas if something's actually happening at a time, it's just hard because a lot of the sort of webinars and things that are happening, they're often US or Europe time, so it can be a bit tricky over here. But apart from that, newsletters, VUX World again, VoiceBot, there's a few AI. newsletters I've started following. The Neuron, I think, is one of them. He's really good. The guy from the Neuron's actually going to be at South by Southwest Sydney next week, I think, on one of the sessions.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah, so you coming down for that?
Oh, I wish. I wish. I was so excited when they announced last year that they were going to be going to Sydney, and I was like, oh, I need to go to it next year because I missed out. And then now I completely forgot again. So next year is the plan.
It's pretty expensive, so I've found a workaround. I'm going to work a couple of days there, so I'm volunteering on, I think, a couple of the days. They sent the shifts out, and I kind of looked at the shifts they'd given and looked at the schedule and went, okay, I'm going to rearrange my shifts a little bit so that I can go to
Mhm.
some of the sessions I want to go to. So there's a lot happening. It's hard to look at the schedule and work out where to start.
That's actually a really good idea for people who are wanting to get involved, like, but can't justify the price of a ticket. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, get involved and get volunteering. That's yeah, I might have to think about that for next year.
Yeah, I'm quite excited actually. I think it'll be fun. And some of the roles they've got, I think I'm doing speaker liaison and green room assistant, so they should be quite fun, sort of hobnobby kind of roles. That's the hope, anyway.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, is there any particular like throughout your career, have you had any mentors or perhaps some business leaders that you've worked with or anyone that you're excited to see at South by Southwest?
Yeah, in terms of people that have inspired me, I guess, through my career, it's often more the people I've worked with, more so than some random person I don't know that founded a company that's on LinkedIn. I mean, the obvious one is my most recent manager at Salesforce, Greg Bennett. So he's pretty inspirational. He's just a super nice guy, but he's really switched on. He's really good at adapting and sort of shifting to different situations. He founded the conversation design practice at Salesforce, and now they've completely pivoted this year, and he's driving the prompt engineering and prompt design for Einstein GPT at Salesforce, which is massive. Hilary Sinus and Faye Afshar are a couple of really strong female design leaders I've had the pleasure of working with.
Mhm.
And I'm an ambassador for an organisation called Women in Voice. We've got a Australia and New Zealand chapter. So my fellow ambassadors that run that chapter, they're all super inspirational. We've got a great camaraderie. They're great. It's funny. I make a lot of my friends from workplaces over the years. Like a lot of my close friends have been at different workplaces. It's sort of
Mhm.
I've known some people that keep their social life and their work life quite separate, sort of, if you know what I mean. But I've always sort of wanted to bond quite closely with people I'm working with because you're spending so much time with them.
Yeah, I think as well it's especially when you're working in high pressure work environments and you're really relying on a lot of people or a lot of people are wearing lots of different hats, it makes sense that you would want to actually get to know them as a person when you're, potentially spending so much a third of your life with your coworkers.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, that's great that you were able to, connect with them in that way and tell me more about Women in Voice. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
So, Women in Voice, when was it founded? The global organization, I think, was founded about 5 years ago, actually, I think, by Joan Palmer-Bajorek in the US. And then what they decided to do, well, I actually don't know how they decided to do it, but basically chapters started springing up around the world. And I loosely knew about the organization, and then I heard that Jenny Stenhouse in New Zealand, who worked with the global organization, she was looking to found a Australia and New Zealand chapter. So I sort of put my hand up and was like, I'm keen to get involved. And it's mainly about just fostering a network of women working in voice tech, conversational AI.
Mhm.
We try to host events. We haven't been so great at that this year, but we try to host webinars and things throughout COVID. I actually was able to. I was on a overseas trip recently visiting family in the UK, and I was able to connect with a couple of people I've met through Women in Voice in Germany and Spain.
Nice.
It's just this great global network of women, and yeah,
Yeah. No, I'd love to be able to share the details and, maybe we can pop them in the show notes, if anyone
yeah.
is interested in, finding a little bit more about that. But yeah, sounds super cool, and it's always great to just, like, keep that mentorship and that network growing and
Mm.
being able to pass on little tidbits of knowledge.
But yeah, so Women in Voice have a global mentoring program. So I've mentored other women in the US and Germany and Israel. And then we've also, actually in Australia, we were put in touch with a professor at Monash Uni who were running a program with Monash Tech School to encourage young girls, sort of years 9 and 10. So apparently, after about year 10, that's where girls tend to be put off careers in STEM. So they were trying to run these programs to encourage girls and show them how interesting it was. So they had a program called Superbots, which is still running, which we've been involved with. We sort of give them some guidance and mentoring. We jump online and do a little bit of mentoring with the girls. It's in person at Monash Tech School in Melbourne, but then we do little Zoom sessions with each of the teams, and they talk us. They build their own voice bots, so we talk them through stuff. Yeah, and the response to that has been great.
That's so cool.
That's been pretty fun to get involved with.
No, that's awesome. I feel like that representation really does matter. So yeah, kudos to you for getting involved. And on that note, I like to end the podcast with one of my favorite questions, which is, if you were to give yourself, your younger self rather, some career advice, what would that look like? What would that be?
Yeah, that's a really tough one. As I've mentioned a couple of times, is probably back yourself. I mean, I know everybody struggles. I feel like I really struggle with imposter syndrome, but realistically, everyone has imposter syndrome to some extent. And I think even not doing a maths degree was possibly because I was being sort of swayed by teachers and parents. So I feel like sometimes you've just got to sort of trust yourself, trust your gut, and also just don't shy away from situations that seem a bit scary, sort of in the professional world. So get out of your comfort zone. Something like this, which I haven't really done much of before, it's good to just get out there and sort of challenge yourself, and the opportunities that it opens up to you. Yeah, just get out there.
Yeah, and honestly, you speak very eloquently. You can tell that you work in voice. I was like, but yeah, I think that back yourself, that mentality, I think, and especially as women and women being in STEM, it's sometimes really hard just to be like, you know what, I'm here, I'm going to give it my best shot. And the thing that I tend to realize over my career is that people actually really want to help. So it's fine to ask for help and ask for advice. So yeah, it sounds like you going out of your comfort zone and joining me today, which I'm super grateful for, is hopefully going to open up some doors.
Yeah, well, you never know. And yeah, network, like that's the other advice. Don't be scared to network. So it can be a bit like, I can't imagine how people do sales cold calling, but sometimes I reach out to people, and yeah, some people can be a little, they might not get back to you, but then the people you least expect will be super helpful. That makes up for any sort of lack of response you might get from others. So yeah, it's just amazing the people you meet and the different sort of, different areas that people are working in.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. I definitely have learnt a lot. And yeah, thank you so much again. Really appreciate your time and your insight.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.